Okay, thank you for joining the last day of our training courses for GDPR principles and concepts. I would like to go through a quick reminder for what we explained last session before starting for our session today. Day before yesterday, we had a quick look on the GDPR principles where the data, the processing activities should be fair, lawless, and transparency. The data controller, we have to be very honest with the customers, and we have to explain to them what are the processes we need their information, and these processes should be, of course, legal. Also, the purpose of limitations, you have to be limited to the purposes which you collect the data for. Don't use the personal data for any other processes which you did not mention for your data subjects. Data minimization, you must have a minimum amount of data. Don't use any data or don't ask for any data which you don't need it or you'll process it. Data, it should be accurate. You have to give the permission for the users to access their data at any time, to update it or make any modification for it. Also, data must be have a retention period time, and you are not allowed to keep this data forever in your data center or storage facilities. This because it's illegal. You have to define the retention period where you have to delete this data from your data center. And finally, the integrity and confidentiality for the data, and you have to provide with required security controls to protect the data from any leakage or any problems it can happen for it. The second topic which we covered, it was the privacy notice, and we mentioned the privacy notice. It's a public document and it will be available for any user or data subject who provide his information for the controller. And this, as we had a look day before yesterday when we went through some websites, and we found that almost all the websites or the public websites we are using the same information. What are the data will be collected, what are the activities or processing activities, if there is any data transfer, if there is any third party, what are the security controls on ground for protecting the data, and so on. This is the notice. Also, we covered the personal data inventory, and we mentioned that in personal data inventory, we can have personal data inventory, or we can have processing activities inventory. Whatever any one of them, we are the same. If you are personal data inventory, this means that you have inventory for all your data and the processing activities for it. If you have inventory for the processing activity, it will be inventory for the processing activities, including the personal data. And this document, it's an internal document, and this it will be very important for GDPR compliant. And we mentioned that it will be approved for due diligence if there is any problem happened or data leaked during the operations. Finally, we highlight the topic. I think we covered the retention period, and this retention period policy. You must have a policy for retention period, how long the data it will be stayed in your site. And as we mentioned, that if there is any contradiction with any other law or local law, that the data it should be stayed for some time, even after the processing requirement is completed, then it can be allowed to keep the data. And for example, if you have a contract and this contract it will be for 1 year and the contract is expired, then you should delete the personal data for the users whose their contracts are expired. But if the local regulations, for example, saying that no, you have to keep this data for at least 2 years, then it will be considered as a reference for any cases or whatever, then you can keep this as a reference for 2 years, and this it will be the justification that you are compliant with the local rules. Finally, we covered the consent, and we said that the consent, this is one of the legitimate methods which the users can connect the data, or I mean the controllers can collect the personal user data, and we can process it, and we can send them whatever any information we wanted, or it depends upon their activities and the approval from the users. Before going further today in our course, do you have any questions regarding the last 2 sessions? Do you have any questions regarding last 2 sessions? Okay. Now we will start with the another topic for the data subject rights requests. This it will be which we call it DSRQ. Data subject, we agree that these are the people who owns the information. And this it will be some requests from the data subject for the controller. There may be some requests from the data subject for the controller. GDPR provides the following rights for individuals or the data subjects. What are these rights? The right to be informed. The right to be informed that the data subject, he must be informed with the data or personal data which it will be collected. He should be informed with the process activities. He should be informed if there is any leakage for his data. Also, he must have the right of access to access his data at any time when he will be able to update it or even to delete it. The right to erase, that he has the right to erase his data if he wants to eliminate his personal data from the processing, then he can delete this data from the processing activity. Right to restrict the processing. Do you remember last day or the day before yesterday, we explained that there are some situations, there may be some decision taking automatically. The controller, he will collect the data from the data subject, and we will be able to take some decision. For example, if I want to request for a loan, then I will provide my data for data controller, and the data controller using automatic techniques, he will define if I am a good candidate for this loans or not. In some situation, you may not want you to be subject for automatic evaluation. There may be some situation, maybe you are handicapped or whatever, when this automatic evaluation, it will not be fair for you, and you want to restrict the processing to make it as a manual processing instead of technical processing. Automatic processing. The right to data portability. We must understand if there is any data transfer, and this data, if it will be transferred inside European Union countries or outside European Union countries, and we finally the right to object if they have any complaint. When we must have the right to raise this complaint. It can be raised to the controller directly through the DBO or through the supervisory authority. These are the rights for the data subject under the GDPR. Data subject access rights requests process. if you received data subject request, this request, it can be whatever. It can be, I want to specific data, I want to know to delete data, or whatever, any request from the data subject, right? Then what will be the process which it should be followed by the controller? The data subject or his legal representative, he may be a lawyer, they can make the request. And this means that there is first condition that the data subject himself or his legal representative, his lawyer, they have to make this request. And we have to make it in writing. This request should come in writing, except in Germany. Except in Germany. In Germany, it can be accepted as verbal. In Germany, it can be accepted as verbal. Okay. Then the second step, that the request should be registered. The request should be registered because you have to store it, you have to save it. You must have a proof that the data subject or his lawyer, he sent you a request. Otherwise, the data subject, he will come later, you say, no, I did not provide anything. Then you have to show it to the supervisory authority. When the data controller, he have to verify the data subject. He have to make sure that this is the person who seems or who should be the data subject. Otherwise, someone, he can come and say, I am Osama and I want to collect some personal data. And if I am not Osama, he is not Osama, this will be a problem because this will be some type of data leakage, and this the controller will be subject for the penalty. Okay. Finally, when we have to, the data controller, we have to provide this information for the data subject within 30 days, maximum 30 days. This is the time period which is allowed by the GDPR to provide the data requests or the data subject access requests. When so simple, number one, we have to the data subject or the lawyer, we have to provide the request. The controller, we have to register this request. We have to confirm the identity of the requesters, and finally, we have to provide the data within 30 days. Okay. There are some situations where the controller can deny providing the the requests to the data subject. What are these situations? Number one, if the requested data, it will disclose other natural personal data without his permission. If the request which the controller received mandates that he have to disclose other natural person data, then this means that this is not allowed. The controller, he has the right to reject this request, because this means that you must have a consent from the other person when you will be able to collect this data. Or there are some situations where the data are given by data subject under confidentiality. Under confidentiality, that this data, it will be provided only for some reasons, whatever these reasons, but it's under confidentiality conditions. Then in this situation, this data, it will not be given to the data subject, and we have to deny the access because the data that's required, it was given under confidentiality condition. Or if the required data, it will require long processing time or resources. Require long processing time or resources. When the data controller, he has the right to deny the request. And finally, if the requested data, it's a public available information. If it's a public available information, for example, it's published over the internet or the website or whatever, then there is no need to waste the time of the controller and the data subject. The data controller, he will not provide this information to the data subject. But of course, he must have the justify the reasons of denying the data access subject rights. He have to type the or send in writing the justification why he refused or he denied the requests from the data subject. Okay. Any question regarding the DSAR, data subject access rights? Any questions?
Yeah, one thing.
Yeah, please.
When you say it's like available information, which means like.
Sorry, I cannot hear your voice. Can you raise your voice, please?
Yeah, when you say it is like publicity available information, is that when the information is already available in the public, is that you mean to say?
Yes, you are right.
So when it is already disclosed in the public, which means like the organization decides that I will not spend my time or resources in what you are asking, it's already available in the public.
You are right. You are right.
Okay.
You are right.
Thank you.
You are most welcome. Okay, another topic, it will be the data protection impact assessment. It's a very important topic, my friends. This is a very important topic, and you can think about it as risk management or risk assessment. This you can think about it as risk assessment, but in the GDPR we call it data protection impact assessment or DBIA. DBIA. What is the data protection impact analysis? Data protection impact analysis is the process to help and identify and minimize the personal data protection risks. We want to discover the risks and minimize these risks, which it can threaten the personal data. We have GDPR advise that you can use the DBIA, the data protection impact assessment, in two situations. For any new processes, introduced in the organization, when you have to check if the collected data, it will be secure or not, and what are the risks which it will be subject for, and you have to develop some security controls and safeguards to protect against these risks. Or if you have any existing processes, you have already existing processes, but you have some new changes in it. For example, you are printing the invoices as hard copy, but now for make life easy, you want to send these invoices by email. When although the process it's existing, but you have some new changes, and these new changes you want to conduct TBIA, when you make sure that whatever any new risks, it will be highlighted, and you will have the appropriate security controls to protect against these risks. What are the objectives of the data protection impact assessment? Number one, we have to assess the risks. We have to understand the risks against the personal data. This point number one. We have to protect the personal data against these risks by creating the proper security controls and safeguards. Also to assess the natural person data access rights. The natural person data access rights, we highlight that this is it's very important that this natural person, we have access for their information. It should be accurate, it should be protected. We have the right to delete it, minimize the information which is required for the processing. We have you have to define, or the data controller, we have to define storage period or retention period for this data and so on. But you have the DBIA, it will assess all these GDPR principles. Is it acceptable or not? Also, if you assess the risks, then we must have an action plans. These action plans to mitigate the risks. We want to mitigate these risks. We want to minimize these risks. And finally, this will be due diligence proof. And we explained what is the meaning of due diligence in the last two sessions. With DBIA, it will be a due diligence proof if the personal data is leaked by intentionally or unintentionally from the data controller environment. Okay, what are the steps for the data impact assessment? What are the steps? Number one, you have to identify the need for DBA. You have to say, yes, we need DBA or we don't need it. When you need it and when you don't need it, you need it, as we mentioned, in two situations. If you have new process and you want to highlight the risks which it will may threaten the personal data, or there may be some new changes in your existing processes and you want to check if these changes, it will introduce any new risks or not. Then you have to describe the process. What is the process which it will be used? What is the process, activity process which it will collect this information? You have to describe it very well, and you have to understand this process and what are the type of the data which it will be collected. You have to consider consolidation. Of course, this is very important. Consultation, this is very important from the subject matter experts, because usually you may not understand all the processes which you have. When this means that you have to work very closely with the business owners or process owner to understand the process, the activity process, when you will be able to figure out whatever any data, personal data, it will be required. And you have to check if this process, is it necessary or not. If it's necessary, then there is no need to have these risks and to collect this personal information. If the process it's not mandatory, then what is the point of collecting any information from for a process which is mandatory? It's not mandatory for the organization or for the operation. This means that you may be in trouble with the GDPR. Step number 5, you have to identify and assess the risk. Of course, you have to identify the risk. You have to define what is the consequences of these risks and what are the likelihood of these risks. And you have to, of course, to develop the action for the security measures. You have to develop an action plans for safeguards and security measures. Then you have to sign off the record. You have to finalize this action plan and finalize all these steps. And you have to integrate outcomes into plan. The action plan, as we mentioned, you have to develop the action plan and you have to implement it. And finally, you have to keep review on this action plan. You have to review the action plan. If this action plan is processed in the proper way as it should be, and what is the effectiveness of the security controls, and if they are achieving their objectives or not. These are the steps which you have to follow in the data impact assessment or DBI. Any questions?
Yeah, hi. Osama, I have a question on DPI.
Yeah, please.
So basically, is this the assessment which also has the impact assessment as well as the risk assessment? So when I say risk assessment, does it also involve the risk treatment and the risk mitigation and the remediation and stuff like that? So is it a combination of both two into one impact assessment?
Yes. Yes, in GDPR language, we call it impact assessment. But as you can see now, we are almost the same. يعني, in risk management in general, what are the steps? In risk management, you have to define the assets. Then you have to define the asset value, vulnerabilities, threats, consequences. When you have to define likelihood, when you define the risk level, risk priority, risk treatment options, and finally you have to develop the action plan. They are the same concept, but of course now the assets, the step of assets is very simple because the assets here there is no need as in the risk management to understand the organization context and processes, activities, and so on. Because the asset here is very clear. It is a personal data which you will collect it on the behalf of the processing activities. When the assets here, is the information or the personal data, and after that you will find the same concept. The same concept is exactly the same. You will find here the consultation, this which we call it in risk management, that you have to work very close with the process owners. Here you have to identify and assess the risk. Here you have to make the mitigation. Here you have to make the outcome into a plan, which is in some situation call it risk treatment plan. Then you have to monitor and measure the controls to make sure of its effectiveness.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm afraid that this is repeated. This is wrong. Forget about this one. This is wrong slide. Okay. Okay. Now we will have another very important concept for the personal data security. This is very important. Okay, you are a data controller. You have to collect the data from your data subjects, and it's mandatory that you have the what we can say to protect this data. You have to protect this data, and protecting of this data, it will be very important. Otherwise, you will be in trouble with data leakage or whatever with GDPR authorities. Then, what is the personal data security? Personal data, the organizations, or in other words, I can say the data controllers and processors. Here, if you would say data controllers and processors, they have to protect the personal data, which we are collecting. And this makes sense. And we have to provide the best practices in choosing the appropriate security controls and safeguards. This is the definition of the personal data security. And this, it will not make any difference between to protect personal data or protect any other information data. It will be, the concept it will be the same. Then if you think about the data security controls, preventive, corrective, detective, deterrent, compensation, physical, management, administration, law and regulation, all the concepts, it will be the same for security control, because by the end of the day, personal data, it's a part of the security information of any organization. Then, number one, we have to provide the physical controls. We have to provide physical control, and this physical control for protecting the devices which is hosting the personal data. You have to protect the data center, you have to use CCTV, you have to use fences, you have to use lights, you have to use AC, you have to use power generator. When the devices, it will not be corrupted if there is any electricity surge or whatever. Then number one, it will be the physical controls. Number two, you have to make the risk management process, and this is the one which we discussed in the last few slides. The risk management process, or the risk, as we call it, data impact, DPIA, data what it was. Usually I am forgetting this data impact assessment. Okay. When we have to make the risk assessment, and of course all of you know that this risk assessment, it's a continuous process. It's not just done once. It should be on regular days. Every time you have to repeat, or at least every year you have to repeat the management process to assess the assessed risks and to make sure that there is no new risks are emerging. Also, you have to develop security policies, and these security policies, it can be high level or specific topic. Do you know what is the difference between high level security policy and topic specific security policy? What is the difference between high level security policy and topic specific security policy?
So high level in the sense like it is like an activity level, and topic specific could be a task level.
Okay, high level security policy, it can be information security policy in general. But when we say topic specific security policy, it can be email security policy, internet security policy, acceptance use policy, VPN security policy, and so on. Okay, also we have to develop the appropriate security controls. This is very important because if you have any risks, if we have any risk, then this means that we must have the security controls to protect against these risks and minimize its effect. We have to develop a competence program. This is very important for security operations team. My friends, operations team in security, it is the key success factor or the key failure factor. Because I can have the best security solution installed in my organization, and it may cost me 10 million US dollars. But if the operations team are not qualified and we are not able to read the logs and we are not able to discover the attacks and how to respond to these attacks, then this security model does not mean anything for me. It's a waste of time. The real investment in the security, it will be in developing competence programs for security operations team. Because if the security operations team are qualified, they will be able to read the logs, they will be able to discover risks, they will be able to discover attacks, they will be able to discover the incidents, we will be able to respond for these attacks and risks and incidents, and we will be able to update the security controls which we have when these incidents or risks, it will not to prevent the occurrence of these risks once more. This is very important. When the competence program for security operations here, it's not a waste of time. Unfortunately, from my experience in the market, first budget which it should be eliminated in the IT department, it will be for the training courses. And frankly speaking, I think any person who will take this decision, he will create a burden in the organization because the people will not be qualified. There may be attacks. People, especially the security people, because their field is dynamic and they have to improve their qualifications I don't want to say every year. It may be every month. Then if they find that there is no improvement in this company, then they have to move to other company, which it will provide them with the competency and training programs and so on. Then they have to keep this in their mind and understand it very well. Also, the security governance. There must be some sort of security governance in the data controller and data processor environment, then to make sure that all the processes and the activities are done in a proper way as documented in the policies and procedures. Awareness session, it's very important. From our experience, we found that the awareness session, it represents the real success of any project. During the implementation of ISO 27001, we are meeting the top management and they explain to us their objectives, what are the reasons behind the implementation of the ISO and ISMS and so on. This it will take one day, but although we are spending maybe 6 months or maybe 1 year in big organization for the ISO 27001 implementation, after that, we have to work with the staff. The staff, you will find that this it will be really very difficult with them. Why? Because these persons, they are thinking that you are coming to make their life difficult. You want everything to be documented, everything it should be written. If there is any action, you must have permission and make a risk assessment for it. Don't do anything without risk assessment. Whatever any document changes, it should come with the document controls and all this stuff. And they feel that this it will be a burden work for them, and you are increasing their sufferingness in the company, and it's enough what the work we have daily, then there is no need to make life difficult by all these mandatory requirements for ISO 27001. But when we start, we say, okay, our new approach with these companies, that we will make the management meeting, we will understand their objectives, then the second task immediately, I will arrange the awareness session. This awareness session, it's not for security in general. This awareness session, it will be only for implementing the ISO. What are the benefits which you will get it when you will implement the ISO? ISO, it's not coming to make your life difficult. ISO, it's not coming to make your life complicated. ISO, it will help you. ISO, it will provide you some, what we can say, proof that you are doing your job in a professional way. ISO, it will help you to show your manager that you are doing your exercise in the best practices way. And ISO, it will organize your company, it will organize your life, it will organize the operations, because ISO, they mandate that there are clear rules and responsibilities. Then I'm quite sure now, and I can challenge, how many trainees do we have now? We have 12. Now, if I ask you, what are your responsibilities in your company, I am quite sure that 10 persons out of the 12, they don't know their responsibilities clearly. We don't know it clearly. But when we have the ISO 27001, these roles and responsibilities, it will be very clear, and this means that you will have a better performance. When you will have these awareness sessions with the people, you will find that they are very cooperative with us. You will find them very cooperative with us to work with us and implement the ISO 27001. Why? Because we work it professional and we arrange it with awareness sessions. Also, we have to implement the powerful access control. The access control, access the personal data. Of course, the access control, which we are sometimes called AAA. Anyone know what is AAA? What is
authorization, availability, accountability?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Is it authorization, availability, accountability?
No.
Okay.
What is AAA? Access control, this is considered as the backbone of data access. It's authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication, authorization, and accounting. And in some other courses, you will find they will add identification. Identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting. Or in some other courses, they will call it IAM, Identification Access Management. Identification Access Management. Identification, who are you? I am Osama. Okay. Authentication, prove your identity. I am Osama, then I have to prove my identity. How can I prove my identity? I can prove my identity by username, password, or by two-factor, by something you know, something you have, something you are. Maybe username and password, this is something you know, or something you have. It may be a mobile or email or token, where the system, it will send you a code when you can use this code to authenticate yourself, or biometrics. It may be a fingerprint, eye print, whatever. Authorization, what you are authorized to do on this system, what are the application and services which you are able to access. And finally, accounting, what did you do on the system? What did you do on the system? Well, you have to provide a proper access control for accessing these personal data. Also, these personal data, it should be encrypted. It should be encrypted. Even data addressed or in transient data addressed, if it's kept on the storage or the machines, and in transient if it's moved between hosts or over the networks, when the data, it should be kept encrypted. You must have clear backup and recovery procedures. You must have clear backup and recovery procedures. And finally, you have to keep plans for business continuity and disaster recovery for the organization data and services. These are the personal data security controls. And of course, if you are familiar with the security controls, you will find that there is no difference between personal data security controls and general information security controls. Any questions? Any questions? Okay. Now we will have another topic, which is called privacy by design. And in some other situation, you may find another security by design. Do you know what do we mean by security by design or privacy by design? Just brainstorming before going through the slides. What do you mean by privacy or security by design?
I believe privacy by design means the process in which the system is implemented or created. It has to pass through like a procedure that has to include security.
Okay. Any other opinion?
So when you create a policy or when you design something for your organization, you start implementing privacy or security with every step that you proceed towards your end.
Okay. Generally, when we are saying privacy by design or security by design, this means that we security and privacy, it should be integrated in the design of the system or an application from day one, from scratch. Unfortunately, the concept of the security, it will come after the implementation of a software or system. We start after we make the implementation to check how this system will be secure. And usually we are dependent upon the compensation security. We can protect it through VPN, we can protect it through hosted in different zones or isolated zones and so on. Although when we say security by design, that if it's an application, this means that the application, you must have review for the code, you must have testing for the application input, and all this stuff. When privacy by the design, this is the data protection through technology design. Through the technology design. If you are using technology design, then the data protection, it must come in the design itself. When you define what is the objective of your system, when during the defining the objective, the data protection, it should be in your mind. where the privacy should be incorporated in systems and application design, not during the test phase or implementation phase. And this is the real problem, because if it will come as a test phase or implementation phase, this means that the application or the system it's already up and running and it's already implemented. And to make any changes in the core of the application, it will cost time, it will cost money, it will cost a lot of things which usually the management it will accept the current situation because they don't want to lose more money or to lose time to announce new product or a new service. But whatever any application or system you have, you must have the privacy or security as objective in the process of the design. For example, you know that if you have any application, design application, you have something called DSLC. Do you know what is DLC?
Secure development lifecycle.
Sorry?
Secure development lifecycle.
Software development lifecycle. Software development lifecycle. Software development lifecycle, it have some phases. Number one, define the objectives, design the objective, coding, implementation, testing, implementation, and finally disposing. These are 6 phases for the SDLC. But during the SDLC, you have to keep the security as one of the main input and output of each phase. In objective, you have to make sure that the objective data should be security and how the data it will be secure and all this stuff. When you will make the design of the application, you have to keep in your mind the data privacy security. If you are doing the coding, then you have to keep the security as a part of your objectives. Don't use any libraries which you downloaded from the internet without analysis its codes. Don't use any processes from the internet without making its analysis, and so on. Testing, you have to test the security of the application. You have to test if you type whatever, any characters instead of numbers in the field, what will happen if the application, it will crash or it may have some injection attacks or whatever it is. When these are the security concept of security by design or privacy by design. And privacy by design, they are exactly the same as personal data security by design. When, as we mentioned, that you will find privacy by design, they are requirements. It will be the same concept, whatever any data or application or any system which you are developing, you have to keep in your mind the privacy of the data from scratch to make sure that this data is secure over the time. Okay, we will have our break for 10 minutes, then we will come back. Any questions? Okay. Now we will cover another topic which is considered a very important topic in GDPR for data transfer. Of course, we mean the personal data transfer. In personal data transfer, the GDPR, it allows personal data transfer within European Union countries. We don't have any problem to transfer the data within European Union countries because all the European Union countries are subject for GDPR laws and regulations. But if the data or the personal data, it will be transferred outside EU countries, then this means that we must have the appropriate security controls for protecting this data. What are the requirements for personal data transfer? Of course, we mean outside EU. You must have a contract with the data controller and whoever, any third party which it will receive this information. And this contract must define what are the type of personal data which it will be transferred, and what are the processing activities for this personal data, and what are the responsibilities of the controller and the responsibilities of third party in protecting this data. What are the security controls and safeguards for protecting the data? And finally, what are the data breaches actions? What are the data breaches actions? Suppose that the data is breached, then what will be the actions should be taken to protect this data? Also, there are some conditions which call it binding corporate rules. What are binding corporate rules? Here in step number 1, we mentioned that the requirement for transferring the data, it will be a contract, if you have a contract with between the data controller and the third party, or which we call it binding corporate rules. Binding corporate rules, this enterprise company, it may have the office in one country and they have other offices distributed across the world. For example, Microsoft, we have the head office in USA and we have an office almost in every country now. Then if they want to share the information together, because they are under the same umbrella, it's the same company, Microsoft, then they will be able to share this information under what we call it binding corporate rules. Binding corporate rules. Or maybe it's a holding company, and under this holding company, we have other companies which each company has different activities, but again, we can share the personal data collected under the binding corporate rules of the holding company. These are the two conditions or requirements to transfer the data. What are the countries which have appropriate privacy controls? Or in other words, the data privacy can be transferred to these countries without any regulations or security controls. Here you are, here the member of EU Union, and here are the other countries. You will find Iceland, Norway, Argentina, New Zealand, Uruguay, Switzerland, Jersey, and so on. These are the list of the countries which are allowed, and they have a proper privacy controls. If they have proper privacy controls or laws, in other words, instead of saying controls, if we say law, we have proper privacy law, then we are allowed to share the information of EU citizens without having any contracts or without having any corporate binding rules, which we mentioned before. Okay. This the fines for the GDPR if we during the data transfer, data is leaked by any way, then these are the fines which you have to pay for it. For severe violations, you have to pay up to 20 million euro or 4% of the global turnover. And if it's less severe violations, then you have to pay 10 millions and 2% of the global turnover for the last year.
Osama, I have a question on the slide.
Okay, please.
Hello? Yeah, the previous slide. Yeah. So here, when we say the GDPR fines, okay, so here we are saying the severe violation and the less severe violation. So are there any kind of benchmark for this severe and less severe violations? Like how can we?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the law, in the GDPR text, yes, we defined the information. This it will define or it will depend upon the number of affected users. For example, the number of the personal data which it will be leaked. يعني for example, if it's all the data or it will be one single record of the data. We have some what we can say references in the GDPR text. But as I told you, it depends upon the total size of the data which is leaked, how many user is affected, and so on.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, managing third parties. Managing third parties, this is very simple, and we covered it before, because third parties, it can be a customer, it can be a vendor, it can be whatever data processor. He is a third party. Third party, it's any entity. It will be any entity hired by the controller to share the processing activities. Any entity hired by data controller to share the personal activities. Third-party contracts, we have two options defined by GDPR. It's managing an existing contract. You have an existing contract with the data processor or whatever, or you have to sign a new contract. And this makes sense, a new contract or existing contract. The data controller can hire a third party to manage part or full processing activities of personal data. This is what we have to define as a third party. But this third party can be the data processor, because the data processor, he is managing full processing activities. For example, as we said, typing or printing invoices, for example. When the data processor, it will be considered as a third party. The third-party contracts should include the following components. This is very important. Now, if you have a contract with the controller and a third party, what are the information which you should have? This is very important. Otherwise, if there is any data leakage and this information it's not clear in the contract, then you will not be able to prove with due diligence. What are the personal data security controls and safeguards for the data? If I share my personal data with you, what will be the security controls and safeguards which you will have to take to protect? What are the protection requirements? As a data controller, I have to define very clear to the third party what are the protection requirements. You have to encrypt the data on rest. You have to encrypt the data on transient. You have to make a strong access control for data access and authorization, and so on. Personal data processing purposes. What are the processing activities and why it's you are collecting the data for? And this it should be very clear, and we have to be matching the GDPR legitimate purposes. We have to conduct DPIA, data protection impact analysis, to define the risks and their impact and the security controls required to protect these assets, which is the personal data. Okay. Finally, we will come to the data breach. And I think one of you asked a question regarding the data breach first day. But if you don't mind, please, I will stop for a few minutes to take the absence and record screenshot. We have 12 person here. Okay, 12 person. Okay. Okay. Thank you for your patience. We will go and I will share my desktop again. We had the absence for today. As we mentioned, we have the absence for today. For the data breach, this is considered as, I think, the last topic, and it's very important. We are humans, and by the end of the day, we are making mistakes, and there may be chance that the personal data it will be leaked, although you are performing the best controls, best security controls, and whatever. There are some data breaches. Then, what is the data breach? Data breach is unauthorized access to personal data of data subject. Unauthorized access for personal data for data subject. This is the data breach. Okay, again, the fines, we discussed this before. If there is any data breach, what are the steps required? If you are a controller, then the controller, he has to notify the supervisory authority within 72 hours of personal data breach incident. Within 72 hours, 3 days. Otherwise, he will not be compliant with the GDPR. Okay? The controller, he should provide the DBO contact information, data breach detailed information, what are the data breaches, how it's breached, what are the processing activities, what are the, how many number of data subjects are affected, and so on. And what is the impact of the data breach? What is the impact of the data breach? What are the security controls existing to protect the personal data? And what are the actions taken to minimize the effect of the data breach? Yani, this step, it was a safeguards, and this is the countermeasures. This is the safeguards, and this is the countermeasures. Also, the data controller, he should notify the data subject with the data breach and what are the data which is breached. We have the right to know this. If you are a processor, then the processor, he must notify the controller. He must notify the controller. My question, do you think the processor must notify supervisory authority or not?
No.
Why?
Because he is a processor and not, the controller. So, I mean, yeah, that's what I feel. Yeah.
Okay, you are right. The processor, he should not contact the supervisory authority. The controller, he is the owner of this case, and the controller, he must inform the supervisory authority within 72 hours, not the processor. The processor, he have to notify the controller of the personal data leaked. He have to provide the information for him, which it will be appropriate information and enough information. When the controller, he can report this case into the supervisory authority. The controller should keep document of personal data breaches, existing security controls, any action taken to minimize the breach action. And also the processor should provide the controller with the necessary information to report the data. Then you will find the concept for processor and controller, it will be exactly the same data, what are the personal data leaked, what are the activities, processing activities, what are the number of affected users or data subjects, and so on. What is the impact? What is the security controls existing to protect the personal data? What are the actions taken to minimize the breach of the data? You will find the information, it will be exactly the same, but the only difference that the controller, we have to report this to the supervisory authority, while the processor, we have to provide this information to the control, to the what we call the data control. Okay. what is the data breach response? If there is any data breach, what you should do? Of course, even if you are data processor or data controller, you have to notify the DBO. Take immediate action to minimize the impact of personal data breaches and document the breach. This step is very important. This step is very important because as you will see that we will make something called learned lessons, and this learned lessons, it's mandatory and required by GDPR. Okay, then these are the actions which any data controller or data processor should do. Notify DBO, take immediate actions to minimize the impact and document the data breach. And of course, the data controller must inform the data protection authority or the supervisory authority with the instant case within 72 hours. Data breaches notifications. If there is any data breach, you have to make 2 notifications. Number 1 for data protection authority and or supervisory authority within 72 hours, and for the data subject. And for the data subject, you have to clarify to them what are the types of data breached and the activities and so on. Okay, now there is a data breach happened. We had an incident. We make the investment. Then what we should do as post-incident response? Number 1, we have to develop learned lessons. Why? To prevent the occurrence of the same incident in the future. And we have to monitor and document the incident remediation actions and ensure its effectiveness. These are the 2 mandatory actions for the post-data breach. And these are critical for GDPR compliance. And if there is any case happen and you did not deliver the learned lessons and you did not monitor and document the incident remediation action and make sure that we are effective to prevent this data breach to happen again, you are not compliant and you will be subject for some fines again. And these are the requirements by GDPR to make sure that you are protecting the data, personal data in a proper way. Any questions? I think we finished the session for today and we finished the training course. Thank you very much.